Hi, I'm Eddie Muller, and once again, it's time for Noir Alley. Today's film is not for the faint of heart. It's one of the most suspenseful films of all time, as well as one of the most influential. Made in France in 1955, it's Les Diaboliques, shortened to simply Diabolique when it was released in America the following year. Keeping the French spelling and pronunciation gave it a mysterious quality that the literal translation, diabolic, just doesn't have. Now, I'm sure there are viewers asking why I'm showing a horror movie on Noir Alley, but we'll discuss that after we've watched the movie. Trying to stick a label on this film is tricky. It's a mystery, it's a thriller, it's got the vibe of a horror film, and there's even a little bit of supernatural subtext. But mostly, it's a classic noir premise. A pair of lovers conspire to bump off a cruel, abusive husband. Only in this case, the lovers are two women. One, the intended victim's wife, the other, his beleaguered mistress. Now, whether the women are actually lovers or not is open to conjecture, just one of the intriguing ambiguities built into the film by its co-writer and director, Henri-Georges Clouzot. Clouzot was a significant and controversial figure in French cinema. A scriptwriter during the 1930s, he began making films in the 40s at Continental Pictures, a Nazi-controlled studio created by the Germans when they occupied France. His 1943 film, Le Corbeau, was vilified by both French and German critics, despite it being his first masterpiece. Post-war, Clouzot was branded a Nazi collaborator by the French government and prohibited from ever again working in motion pictures. That ban was reduced to 2 years after protests from many of France's most prominent artists. In 1953, Clouzot scored an international hit with The Wages of Fear, one of the greatest action thrillers ever made. For a follow-up, he wanted something even more provocative and sensational. It was Clouzot's Brazilian wife, Vera Gibson Amado, who read She Who Was No More, the second novel from the writing team of Pierre Boileau and Thomas Narcejac. At Vera's urging, Clouzot devoured the book in one night, and the next morning secured the film rights. Legend has it that he beat Alfred Hitchcock to the punch by mere hours. A twist of fate Hitchcock would not forget. Clouzot spent 18 months working on a script with his brother, who wrote under the pseudonym Jérôme Geronimi. They made a couple of crucial changes to the story, which I'll explain once you've watched the movie. Of course, the director cast his wife as Christina, the timid spouse of the cruel headmaster played by Paul Meurice. The other woman in the triangle is the great Simone Signoret, playing Nicole, the headmaster's vengeful mistress. Rounding out the cast is Charles Vanel as Inspector Fichet, who suspects that something is amiss at the De La Salle boarding school. For a quiet, small film, the production was long and arduous. Signoret had signed on for an 8-week shoot, but production stretched on for over 4 months, leading to so much tension between the actress and director, they were no longer speaking by the time shooting wrapped. Clouzot was a perfectionist, not only about the performances, but the art direction and cinematography, both of which are essential to the film's dank and sinister atmosphere. Even more than the unexpected plot twists, it's the sense of dread and decay that makes Diabolique feel like a horror movie, even though the plot, beneath the creep factor, is yet another variation on The Postman Always Rings Twice. Diabolique was a sensation upon its release, not just in France, but globally. The terrifying last act earned Clouzot comparisons to Hitchcock, the renowned master of suspense. Clouzot even displayed some of Hitchcock's showmanship by attaching a title card at the end, imploring viewers not to reveal the shocking climax and the startling final twist. Now, if you have not seen it before, get ready. Here is one of the creepiest, most suspenseful movies ever made, Diabolique. literally a heart-stopping climax. Now, I mentioned at the top that Henri-Georges Clouzot made some significant changes in adapting the novel for the screen. One was to relocate the story to a ramshackle boys' boarding school, which enhanced the film's decrepit, mildewy mood and accentuated the perversity of the adults' behavior. These people are in charge of impressionable young boys? Well, that was a stroke of genius, but the other major change was even more crucial. In the novel, it's the headmaster and his mistress who conspire to kill his wife. The book's final twist is that the wife and mistress are actually secret lovers, and they get away with their scheme to give the headmaster a fatal heart attack. The change was not mandated by French censors like it would have been in Hollywood. It was done to give a bigger role to Vera Clouzot, but also to heighten the women's odd and ambiguous relationship. By creating empathy for Christina and Nicole, Clouzot is able to keep the big twist hidden in plain sight. I've always wondered if Alfred Hitchcock would have made these same changes if he'd beaten Clouzot to the book's film rights. He must have been upset about missing out on this story because he did not let it happen again. When Pierre Boileau and Thomas Narcejac published their next novel, 1954's The Living and the Dead, Hitchcock promptly snapped up the film rights. It would take 3 years to create a viable screenplay, but for many of his fans, the resulting film, renamed Vertigo, is among Hitchcock's best. And many people believe it was Hitchcock's determination to make a film scarier than Diabolique that led him to make Psycho, where he even outdid Clouzot's admonition to viewers that they not reveal the surprise ending. Not only did Hitchcock use that same gimmick, he also declared that no one would be seated once Psycho had begun. I must note, however, that Robert Bloch, writer of the book on which Psycho is based, later declared that the scariest film he'd ever seen was Diabolique. Perusing reviews of Diabolique from its initial release, I was surprised to see how it upset so many critics. While acknowledging Clouzot's skill at concocting atmosphere and suspense, many reviewers were dismayed by the cruel and sordid subject and tone, using words like grotesque, horrid, and grisly, none of which are really accurate. In fact, it may have been critics' overuse of the words terror and horror in their reviews that led to Diabolique being labeled a horror movie rather than a psychological thriller, or for our purposes, a film noir. Now, there was a tragic epilogue to the legacy of Diabolique. Vera Clouzot, who worked as a script supervisor for Henri-Georges Clouzot before becoming his wife, as well as the star of his films, actually did have a bad heart. She died of a heart attack in 1960 at only 46 years of age, after Clouzot had wrapped production of La Vérité, a film she co-wrote with him. Well, next time we'll be in more familiar terrain, the mean streets of Los Angeles, for a bad cop noir, starring and co-directed by Edmund O'Brien. Tune in next weekend when I present Shield for Murder, a crime yarn written by the always reliable William P. McGivern. Until then, I'll see you in the shadows.
Next on TCM, Cinderella Jones, then The Affairs of Martha, and later, King's Row. Get the royal treatment from TCM today.